Today's video is on finding square roots. This is a 7th grade skill, so this is for the Advanced Math 6 students. The learning target for today is that you'll be able to find the square roots of a perfect square and know that the square root is the length of one side of a square. We will not be using a calculator on this skill. So the first thing I want to talk about is what is the value of 3 squared? We learned that during our last lesson. So what is 3 squared? That is 3 with the exponent of 2. So that means we have 3 times 3. So if you came up with 9, that is correct. So 3 squared means 3 times 3, which is 9, or 3 squared equals 9. So right here we have a perfect squares chart. And what I want you to notice is 2 times 2 is 4, so this is a perfect square. 3 times 3 is 9, so this is a perfect square. 4 times 4 is 16. 5 times 5 is 25. 6 squared is 36. 7 squared is 49. 8 squared is 64. 9 squared is 81. 10 squared is 100. Now this only goes up to 10 times 10, but we have to know all the way up to 20 times 20. So here it is shaded in for you. If you have your multiplication chart in front of you, what I'd like you to do is go ahead and pause the video here and then shade in all of your perfect squares on your multiplication chart. Alright, so what we learned about perfect squares is that they are the area of the square, or how much space is inside. So if this is 14 feet, okay, and we did 14 squared, we would get 196 feet squared. Oops, sorry about that. Squared. Okay, so this whole square takes up 196 feet squared. All right, now over here we have the area of a square. But what we want to know is how long is one side of the square? So what number did we square to get 256? Okay, so we know that 14 squared is 196. We know 15 squared is 225. So 16 squared would be 256. So we know that we had to square 16 in order to get 256. So 16 squared equals Okay, there we go, I fixed that. So 16 squared equals 256. So the length of one side is 16. Alright, here we go, we have a chart of our perfect squares. We learned this, so this should be review. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video and just take a look at this and determine what 13 squared is, 15 squared, 20 squared, and 100 squared. Okay, so 13 squared is 169. 15 squared is 225. 20 squared is 400. And 100 times 100 is 10,000. So here we have square roots, okay? So 3 squared equals 9. So 3 squared is 9. That's review. What's new today is if we take the square root, okay, if we take the square root of 9, we're going to get 3. It's working backwards. So the square root of 9 is 3. This here's the square root symbol, and when we square a number, or when we square a perfect square, we end up with the base, or the root of the number. Alright, so here we have the square root of 81. So what we have to ask ourselves is what number do we have to square or times by itself in order to get 81, to get 121, 36, and 400. So take a moment, pause the video if you need to, and I want you to think about what each of these would be. So 9 squared would be 81. All right, 11 squared would be 121. 6 squared would be 36. And 20 squared would be 400. So if you get a question that says, what is the square root of 36? The answer is 6. Okay, so we have 9, 11, 6, and 20. All right, now another thing we can do with square roots is we can place them on a number line. So we would have to solve them first. So the square root of 36 is 6. Okay, the square root of 49 is 7. Now if you were given the square root of 43, that we know that's not a perfect square, but we know it's got to be somewhere in the middle of 36 and 49. Okay, so we get 6, 7, and approximately 6.6. All right, what I want you to do now is go ahead and pause the video, fill out your notes, and I'm going to go ahead and go over these. So what we have is we have our perfect square inside of the square root symbol. And essentially what that is the base times the base, and then we could also say that is our base squared when we write that as a perfect square. And then our answer when we take the square root of the number is just the base. So it's 3, or the root. Base is also called the root. So to find the square root, we want to find the base. The square root gives us the length of one side of a square. That's what I showed you a few slides back. So our first step is to find the multiples of the numbers. So 9, the multiples would be 3 times 3. And they do need to be the same number because we are dealing with perfect squares here. Then we can combine those numbers to make the perfect square. So we have 3 squared, and then the base, the 3, is what comes outside of the square root symbol, and that's our answer. If you have a non-perfect square, any number that did not form a perfect square would stay inside the square root symbol. So if we had a non-perfect square number, this is where we would use our prime factorization, but we're not going to get into that. This year we're only focusing on our perfect squares. So you can take the square root of any positive whole number. Okay, if you need to fill out your notes, go ahead and pause the video if you've not already done so. Alright, next we have all of our perfect squares here. Well, rather, our square roots. So we're working backwards from our perfect squares. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a moment, I'm going to fill in some of these, and then I'm going to have you pause the video and do the rest yourself. Alright, so here we have, here we have 144. What times what equals 144? Well, we know that would be 12 times 12, or 12 squared in other words. So we just bring out our base. Now I do want to point out that all this work here, the only reason that we're doing this is for demonstration purposes. The goal is to memorize all of these so that you don't need to go through this process. So when you see the square root of 144, you should automatically know that's 12. But I'm just showing you where that 12 is coming from. All right, let's look at another one. We've got, let's do 361. That would be 19 times 19. That would be 19 squared. And you would get 19 as your length of your side of a square. Let's look at another one. Let's look at 64. That would be 8 times 8, and we can rewrite that as 8 squared. And 8 is the length of one side. Alright, now go ahead and pause the video, fill out the rest of these, and then when you come back, I will have it advanced to the next slide, and then you can go ahead and check all your work. But I do encourage you to go ahead and fill out the rest of this chart on your own, just to kind of get used to looking at it and looking at each number. Alright, here are the answers. Go ahead and pause the video here if you do not have all of these listed. Alright, so what you should be able to say is that you can find the square root of a perfect square and know that the square root is the length of one side of a square. And you should be able to calculate all of these without a calculator.